evening, ladies and gentlemen. If you could make your way this way, please. I want to start the program. We're going to get started here in just a moment. If you don't mind, come on toward the dais. Welcome to the Science Coalition's Champions of Science All-Star Reception. Pretty cool to be here tonight. Put your hands together in advance for what we're going to be celebrating and all of our dignitaries that are in the house this evening. Appreciate you guys making it out. My name is Grant Paulson. Occasionally in life, you are in a room that you just don't belong in. This is one of those situations for me. I do sports talk radio. That is my job. So while you guys advance our society and do a lot of important things to help this area and our country, I talk about athletes on the radio who are more athletic than me. And oftentimes I critique them and say things like, oh, they should have done a better job hitting that baseball, even though I hit .214 in Little League and they're hitting home runs in an all-star game. But this is a fitting evening to be celebrating all-stars here tonight in our field because, as you guys know, the all-star game just wrapped up in Washington, D.C. Did anybody get to take part in any of the endeavors the last few days? Pretty cool. We have been waiting a while. The last all-star game to be played in D.C. was in 1969. And for some time since, we were counting down to baseball in the nation's capital. Over a decade ago, it returned. And then we've been waiting to finally get an all-star game. I actually recently had a conversation with the owner of the Nationals on the radio, Mark Lerner. And apparently the Nats were close to getting a few all-star games in the past, but they couldn't properly line up date at the convention center. So Major League Baseball has been trying to get the game here for so many years, and he said this is the latest they've had the all-star game in recent history because basically baseball had to allow them to have the game a week later so that they could actually have it, which is pretty neat. But Sunday was the best attended futures game in the history of the event. So Washington, D.C., I thought really did a cool thing. The minor league all-stars all played in the contest, and generally people show up at the end of that game in the various cities I've been to because there's a celebrity softball game afterwards, where like one of the Kardashians will hit a softball and everyone will cheer very loudly. But in D.C., we actually very strongly supported all the minor league players, which was great. And it was the beginning of really a wonderful few days of celebrating baseball. Of course, on Monday night, Bryce Harper won the Home Run Derby, which we liked a lot in this town. Pretty cool. And then last evening, Max Scherzer, who's the ace of the Washington Nationals, in his home ballpark, got to start the All-Star game, which was incredible. I wanted to chat for just a minute about science and baseball before we turn things over and start to recognize some of our stars this evening. And I was having a conversation with one of the coaches on the National League All-Star team yesterday on our show, and I asked him, I said, look, you've played the game for so long, you've coached for so long, what do you still love about baseball? And he said it's the evolution of the game. And he actually used the word, he said, this is the science behind the game, which I found pretty fitting last night. And when I asked for an explanation, he pointed a couple things out. You know, science to me, when I think about science, I think of advancement, and I think about being outside the box and maybe finding out why something is the case. And in baseball, we're trying to figure out analytically how to continue to advance the game. And there are two things happening in the game right now that are really fascinating. One is the shift. And I jotted some numbers down on this, but basically the idea is that defensively right now, hitters have hits taken away from them more than they ever have before because instead of having two infielders on each side of second base, teams are now pulling a third infielder on one side of the infield to take away base hits. So you got a guy like Bryce Harper who faced a shift 19% of the time 3 years ago, who this year is facing a shift 45% of the time. And his batting average has gone from over 300 to 214, and his agent now wants to ban the shift. He wants to get rid of the shift because it's hurting his client. But if you talk to coaches and players, they say this is good for the game. This is advancement. This is outside-the-box thinking. This is a science that we're evolving, and now hitters are going to have to adjust mechanically how they're going to swing. But the other thing that's happening in baseball, in addition to the shift, where you've seen just a few years ago, 4,700 ground balls hit into a shift, 11% of them went to the opposite side of the field. Of those 11% of swings, only 23 of those swings led to runs, so teams are now saying, well, how do we combat this? What do we do? And we've seen more bunts this year against the shift than we've ever seen before. So the science is changing in baseball. But we've got a team that's now starting games with relievers instead of starters. They're calling it bullpenning. And And the Rays are doing this, and they're succeeding, so other teams are saying, well, maybe we'll do that. And in talking to this coach yesterday, they said they want to continue to see the science of baseball change. The way that we view the game is always changing. So I thought that was fitting on All-Star Weekend as we're here to talk about science and our All-Stars tonight. That here we are 100-plus years into Major League Baseball. The All-Star festivities back for the first time since '69, and the game is always changing. We're always trying to find the next way to play the game that right now everyone says is crazy and isn't going to work. But the research in the front offices around baseball is being done to stay ahead of the curve. I want to welcome Anna Quider, the president of the Science Coalition, up front so we can get started tonight, the director of Federal Relations for Northern Illinois University.
Well, thank you so much, Grant, and thank you all for coming here tonight. Today we're here to celebrate the important work that all of our champions of science do in Congress to support scientific research, especially fundamental research. The Science Coalition is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We represent more than 50 of the nation's leading public and private research institutions. We are dedicated to sustaining the federal government's investment in fundamental research as a means to stimulate the economy, drive innovation, and secure America's global competitiveness. Federal support for research is key for all of our member universities in continuing to create new knowledge, educating the next generation of researchers, and fostering the nation's innovation ecosystem. Each year since 1999, the Champion of Science Award is given to a small number of members of Congress whose actions and votes are consistent with these values. Yesterday, baseball fans across the country celebrated baseball's MVPs at the All-Star Game at Nationals Park. And apparently they had some pretty in-depth scientific discussions of their own as well. Tonight, we are celebrating our own MVPs in Congress who have championed science and scientific funding. Some of those members who have joined us tonight are Senator Gary Peters of Michigan, Representative Jim Cooper of Tennessee, Representative John Culberson of Texas. We will see Representative Bill Foster from Illinois, Representative Kevin Yoder of Kansas, and Representative Jerry McNerney of California. We are also joined by key players within the science community, including Dr. Fleming Krim, Chief Operating Officer of the National Science Foundation, and Undersecretary Paul Dabber, Undersecretary for Science in the Department of Energy. Thanks again to all of you for joining us here tonight. I'll turn it back to Grant to help us recognize our most recent champions of science, Senator Gary Peters, Representative Kevin Yoder, and Representative Bill Foster. Thank you tonight.
Thank you, Anna. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Arthur Lupia up front, was the professor of political science, University of Michigan, and we will get started.
I want to thank everyone who's here from universities and government for your tremendous service to the nation. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce Senator Gary Peters of Michigan, a recent recipient of the Science Coalition's Champion of Science Award. During his tenure in Congress, Senator Peters has worked tirelessly to keep the United States at the forefront of scientific discovery and innovation. In Congress, he serves on the Senate Commerce Committee, the Senate Armed Services Committee, and the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. Senator Peters is also the co-creator and co-chair of the Senate Chemistry Caucus and the Senate Smart Transportation Caucus. We are especially appreciative for his bipartisan bicameral work to enact the American Innovation and Competitiveness Act. Through the lengthy process of drafting and shepherding this act into law, Senator Peters highlighted the importance of fundamental scientific research and STEM education to the nation. We are immensely grateful for all the work Senator Peters does to help science empower our nation's workforce, improve our nation's security, and fuel our nation's spirit of innovation. Please join me in congratulating Senator Peters on this well-deserved recognition.
Wheaties box here. here.
Yeah, lots of cereal.
Great, great. Thank you,
Thank you so
Professor.
much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Well, thank you, Professor. Thank you to all of you for being here, and thank you for the honor. I appreciate University of Michigan, Wayne State University, two members from my state that are part of this coalition. But thank you to all of the universities for all the work that you do each and every day to make sure the United States is on the cutting edge when it comes to the next big thing, whatever that next big thing is. I personally believe that we are probably living in the most exciting time in human history to live. When you think about where we are on the verge of some incredible breakthroughs. Being from Michigan, the area that I've been focusing a great deal of work on with the universities in my state have been self-driving cars. The fact that we'll be able to get in an automobile without a steering wheel, without brake pedals, and to take us safely from point A to point B, perhaps eliminate nearly all traffic accidents when you consider that 95% of all accidents are the result of human error. When we can take that equation out, and when we can take that out of an equation that leads to nearly 40,000 deaths on our highways every year and hundreds of thousands of debilitating injuries as a result of that, that's really a big deal. But to get there, you have to have basic science. You have to have basic engineering. You've got to put in the research work in order to have these cutting-edge technologies, whether it's self-driving cars or what we're seeing with CRISPR technology, synthetic biology will be able to cure diseases we never thought we were capable of doing. I mean, it's an incredibly exciting time. But we have to be making those investments, and those things can sometimes be difficult to push through in Congress. My colleagues here who are being awarded with this, congratulations to you as well. We are among a group of legislators who are radical here in Washington, and I say we're radical because we believe in science. That is a radical thought. It's a radical thought we got to make not radical. We've got to get more and more of our colleagues engaged, understanding that this is the basic seed corn of our country. That if you are not investing in this and putting no strings on it, it's got to be curiosity driven, which all of your members and all the members of your faculty and researchers. It's about just being curious about how things work and how to figure out what's actually happening. And we often don't know where that's going to lead, but it can lead to truly marvelous things, whether it's self-driving cars that saves lives or synthetic biology that cures diseases that we never cured before. So, it is really an honor just to be here among all of you. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for your advocacy. This is not easy advocacy in a time of shrinking resources and when there's a lot of other competing demands and some folks who don't share the passion for science that I share, my colleagues share, and all of you share, that you have to be out there, you have to be advocating, you have to be talking about these issues. We have to get the public at large engaged in it. And part of that, we've got to make sure the public at large knows this isn't something to be afraid of, although we're going to have some big changes in our society. This is about empowering people and about making this world better. We always have known throughout human history, it's been that discovery or that journey of discovery that has led to the changes that have made this world better for people. We can't give up on that focus. We can't give up on that journey. That takes the commitment of everybody here in the room. Thank you for honoring me tonight and my colleagues, but I just want to honor all of you. Thank you for being there in the fight each and every day. Thank you.
Thank you for being a radical, Senator Peters. We need more, but thank you so much, you guys, for fighting the good fight on our behalf. Next up is Dr. Rodolfo Torres, the Interim Vice Chancellor for the University of Kansas Office of Research.
Well, thank you, everyone, for coming tonight, and a special thank you to the Science Coalition for putting together this event. And whoever thought of the baseball theme for the event, I congratulate you. I think it cannot be more fitting for celebrating the true champions we're going to celebrate. So it's my tremendous honor and my pleasure to introduce Congressman Kevin Yoder from Kansas 3rd District. As we at KU know, Congressman Yoder has been a strong champion for federal science funding since coming to Congress in 2011. He has a unique understanding of the importance of federal investment in fundamental research to improving human health, driving advancement in agriculture, enhancing national security, and stimulating the industries of tomorrow. For this reason, we were pleased to see him honored with the Science Coalition Champion of Science Award in 2016. I will be remiss if I did not mention that Congressman Yoder is a Shayhawk, having received both his bachelor and law degree from KU, so Rothschild. A strong supporter of robust federal investment in science, in scientific research across agencies and discipline, Congressman Yoder has been particularly active in his support of biomedical research. For example, recognizing the life-saving potential of cancer research at KU, Congressman Yoder was a critical advocate in Congress for helping the KU Cancer Center receive its National Cancer Institute designation. This designation has allowed for additional research that is generating cutting-edge techniques to combat cancer and giving hope to countless patients across the state and region. His support for biomedical research is not limited to activities at KU. As a member of the House Appropriation Committee, Congressman Yoder has repeatedly led efforts to increase overall funding for the National Institute of Health, recognizing the potential of front-end investment in research to save lives, improve human health, and reduce the long-term costs of healthcare. Along with his colleagues, some of whom have been mentioned are in this room, his effort led to record funding for the NIH in recent years. These funds are allowing research at U.S. universities to pursue cures, promote public well-being, and to continue to lead the world in biomedical innovation. Congressman Yoder's support for science and technology goes beyond the biomedical field to further promote quality science and enhance the efficacy of our federal investment in research. Congressman Yoder is the lead House Republican on a bipartisan legislation such as Fair Access to Science and Technology Research Act, which creates a standard open access policy for all federally funded research. Additionally, he has used his position on the Agriculture Appropriations Subcommittee to advocate for robust funding for USD research programs that catalyze game-changing advancement in our agricultural sector and benefit the nation's farmer. These are just a few of the myriad ways in which Congressman Yoder has championed federal investment in fundamental research during his time in Congress. Clearly, Congressman Yoder is a true champion of science and is an ideal recipient of this award. I hope you will all join me in honoring him for his commitment to ensure that America remains the world leader in innovation.
This way? Yep. Okay.
Thank you. Well, a childhood dream has been realized to be on the front of a Wheaties box. I just never knew it was going to be for politics. I'm also glad I didn't wear that same tie today. That could have been really awkward. I am incredibly honored and humbled to receive this award tonight, and I want to thank all of you in this room who dedicate their lives to research. There are probably more smart people in this room per square foot than we're used to in Washington, D.C. And so thank you for coming here and for your passionate advocacy. And I will say the baseball theme has been great, although given the status of the Kansas City Royals this year, maybe a basketball theme would be better for this Kansas Jayhawk. Watch for us this year. We're loaded. But it's a tremendous honor to be part of this event, and Senator, thanks for your great work. This is truly a bipartisan, bicameral effort on so many fronts to promote science. And I will tell you, when I came to Congress in 2010, this was not on my to-do list. It wasn't something I'd spent, I'll be honest, a ton of time thinking of. I had received my degrees from KU in political science, English, and then a law degree, and was new to Congress and had a number of economic issues, but this was not on the top of the list. And I will tell you what really got me engaged in this my first year or two, and I know the Senator sees this as well, constituents coming to our offices telling us their personal stories and struggles on issues and things that I had never even knew existed, right? And I really got to understand that so many of our neighbors and friends and people we care and love about have daily struggles and challenges because of a medical complication. And there was a lot of despair, but there was a lot of hope. I remember meeting with the juvenile diabetes group and them telling me about how hopeful they were that there may be an artificial pancreas someday soon so they didn't have to worry about their son or daughter quite as much when they were sleeping or over at a friend's house. We've had certainly groups that diseases I didn't even know existed, and that despair turned into hope. And what they said to me is, if you can put a few more dollars into medical research, it gives us hope, it gives us the belief that my child or myself or my spouse can someday be cured or treated in a way that give them a fulfilling life. What could be more important and valuable for us to spend time on here in Washington, D.C.? And so over the past few years, I've spent a lot of energy trying to convince my colleagues of what a priority this needs to be of increasing funding for NIH research. And I really have an elevator speech for any type of one of my colleagues. If you're conservative or liberal, I have the speech for you. If this is about your compassion for saving lives, 600,000 people we know die each year of cancer. If your compassion is national security and defense, we know 600,000 people aren't going to die of terrorist attacks on American soil this year because we spend money to defend our country. Why can't we spend those same resources on medical research to defend us from the attacks that come to every street in America, regardless of political affiliation, regardless of your of who you are or where you live? These are attacks that happen to all of us. So it's a national security issue. If you want to talk about saving money, when you look at Alzheimer's costing us over $1 trillion annually by 2050, yet we're spending $500 million annually at the NIH researching Alzheimer's. I mean, if you were really to sit down and do an ROI on that, you might be able to justify spending $1 trillion a year on Alzheimer's research when you know that we're going to have to spend $1 trillion every year. If you could find the cures for that, think about the money you would save, right? And then it's just the compassion for our fellow neighbors and what they have to endure and what all of us have to endure when one of our family members gets sick. One of the things that has been really compelling to me is that there are 10,000 known diseases in the world, and we have cures or treatments for 500 of those diseases. There are 7,000 of those diseases that are considered rare, which means, frankly, if the federal government doesn't invest in that research, companies aren't going to do that. There's not a return on investment for a rare disease like there is for a disease that's very common. And so folks with rare diseases often, and by the way, half of those are children's diseases. So you have a young child that ends up having symptoms and a disease. It takes them a while to figure out what it is, and then when you finally figure out what it is, there's not a lot they can do about it. And so that breaks my heart. And anything we can do to ease that suffering, I think, is consistent with our values and where Congress should put its attention. And as we work towards that, I know there are a lot of young people out there trying to decide whether they should go into the field of medical research, whether that's an industry that is going to be there, whether they're going to have resources to have a future. And my message to them is, based on what Congress is doing the last several years, is not only is there a future here, it's a bright future, it's a growing future, and not only should you go into it, we're counting on you to go into the field of medical research. We need to cure these diseases, and we're going to get it done because of the innovation and the ingenuity, the things the senator spoke about, those exciting ideas that are all across this country. They're waiting for funding. They're waiting for us to give them the opportunity to cure these diseases. And those cures means that someone else working on the same issue, then they find a cure for their disease, and it becomes exponential. And I really believe the 21st century is the century of medical innovation. It is the century where we cure cancer in its many forms. We cure Alzheimer's. We find cures for these diseases that are rare, that we save these lives. And so I'll just close by saying I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And we often debate in this town about investment versus saving money versus tax cuts versus the debt. And I will tell you, I could proudly go to them and say, I borrowed money in your name, and I'm leaving you with a world without cancer or Alzheimer's, and they would thank me for it. So when I get up each day, I think about what is our generational legacy? What did our parents and grandparents give to us? My grandmother just passed last year at 105. And I think about her generation. She was born in 1911, right? She went through the Dust Bowl. They went through the Great Depression. She was a farmer in rural Kansas. They worked themselves tirelessly. They didn't go to college. My grandmother had an 8th grade education so that we would have a better future. That's their legacy, right? They together built, with the investment and the work, institutions of higher learning and all these things we didn't have a century and a half ago. Now, what are we going to do with that legacy? And to me, the torch has been passed to us. And our legacy that we want to pass on to our kids is a world without these diseases, a world without this suffering, a world without this expense. And so it's not only our obligation It's not only an opportunity to this, I think it's an obligation to do so. And so I'll keep fighting, and I'll keep fighting right alongside with all of you, making this, I think, the #1 issue for Congress to face. And I look forward to joining other champions. I want you to have so many champions in this hall that you don't have enough space for all of it. That's my goal. And so let's continue to work together and get that done. And I hope I can get a copy of this to send home for my family to be able to look at when I'm not there. So thank you all. Have a great time.
Thank you, Congressman Yoder. And by the way, thank you for Kelvin Herrera here in Washington. He's going to help our bullpen. You did win a World Series, and having never won a playoff series yet, I don't feel too bad about the Royals this year. However, I do kind words, and we do appreciate Kelvin Herrera. We've got one more MVP to call attention to this evening. So to do that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Jerry Blasey, the VP of Research and Innovation Partnerships at Northern Illinois.
Thank you, Grant. I'm delighted to introduce and honor Congressman Bill Foster, who represents the 11th Congressional District in Illinois. I'd also like to acknowledge Northwestern University, the University of Illinois, and the University of Wisconsin for joining NIU in support of Congressman Foster's nomination. As many of you know, Congressman Foster serves on the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology and on the Energy and Space subcommittees. He also serves on the Committee on Financial Services, where over dinner late one evening, I can attest he brings a somewhat illuminating quantitative approach to that sector of the nation. But tonight we honor the Congressman's lifelong commitment to science, and I can personally attest to that commitment. We participated as spirited competitors in the co-discovery of the top quark at Fermi National Laboratory. He was a member of the well-established Collider Detector Facility team, and I was a member of the upstart D0 collaboration team. And I wouldn't pass on any public opportunity to remind the Congressman that we did a pretty good job sneaking up on you at CDF. The co-discovery was illustrative. It was a wonderful example of the power of collaborative science and team play. The competition brought out the best of both experiments. And just like a baseball team, a particle physics experiment takes a full roster of talented players. The Congressman was indisputably a dual threat in the discovery of the top quark, contributing as an experimental particle physicist and as an accelerator builder. You could say he was something of a utility player and a team player. Yeah, so.
Not loud enough. Let's go.
Yeah. So today, to the benefit of science and to the nation, he continues to be a dual threat as a scientist and as a policymaker. His continuing commitment to science is evident in his steadfast support for federal investment in discovery-based research, which, as a policy directive, drives innovation that fuels our economy, improves our lives, and creates new knowledge. And all MVPs deserve a box of Wheaties. Oh, wrong one. With your picture on it. So please join me in honoring Congressman Foster for his service to the country through his lifelong commitment to science, research, and innovation as a scientist and as a member of Congress. And before you speak, would you sign your card, please?
Oh, is that serious? All right, okay. Fair enough. Well, you know, this Wheaties box helps solve a part of a very serious problem that is common to almost all congressional offices. You know, you're as a member of Congress, you're very often getting an award of some form or another, and it's often accompanied by a plaque of some kind. And you know, you feel an obligation really to display it somewhere in your office, and so you put all of these plaques on your wall. This yields a diagnosable condition in most congressional offices known as plaque buildup. which is, it's endemic. But but this, and I just want to a small shout out to my former colleague Gary Peters. And did you tell everyone of our secret rendezvous a few months ago? Weekend rendezvous? You did not. Gary and I, and I think it doesn't have to be secret anymore. We got permission to talk about it. Gary and I spent much of the weekend about 2-3 months ago on a nuclear submarine underneath the North Polar ice cap, which is one of the features. If you are interested, as both Gary and I are, in nuclear proliferation issues and making sure that the submarines, which are the stabilizing leg of the triad, are really in the condition that we expect they have to be to make our country safe. I had also, as a single member of Congress, I recently went on a sort of one-person CODEL to the weapons laboratories, which are not normally thought of as research laboratories. And I just want to say that the people who work there have given up a lot. There are brilliant people who work in our national security labs. And they're in a situation where they've given up academic careers. They have, they work on projects where if they get a brilliant idea, they cannot go back home and brag to their spouse about it. And yet they are doing brilliant things. If you go into what's called the Red Room, if you go into what's called the Red Room there, you get to see the insides of all of the weapons that are unfortunately necessary to preserve our national security these days. And if you ask the detailed questions of what's inside them and why it is that if a terrorist steals a nuclear weapon, it actually cannot be detonated, with full yield. Even if someone knows, I've seen what's inside it. I'm a pretty good technical person, but because of the brilliant work of generations of really smart people, as Sig Hecker, who is maybe known to many of you, mentioned that stealing a nuclear weapon is easy, but figuring out what to do with it afterwards if you're a terrorist, that's the hard part. But it's comforting to know, and I hope you draw comfort from the fact that when, at least I guess all that remains of what used to be the 3-member PhD physics caucus, when we actually go and look and see the level of competence in those labs and see what is accomplished by those who have made the tremendous sacrifice to walk away from what could be top careers at tenure at top universities, we should always be sure to thank them when you see your old friends who went that direction. That's sort of a side issue. There's fundamental and important research there. We have a great debate going on over North Korea right now, and what it means to be what's called CVID, complete irreversible verification of denuclearization in North Korea. And key to that is having very competent people do the research on what is detectable and what is not with different levels of equipment. Again, cannot be talked about. We have some pretty significant capabilities there, but ultimately Congress is going to have to vote on whether or not any deal that's proposed with North Korea is actually sufficient to verify that denuclearization. And there again, it is wonderful to have competent people. Not only, many of the people involved in that research go back and forth between university positions and work at the labs. And we should always be sure to thank them as well. It's an important part of the research that keeps our country safe. But my background didn't come from that. As was mentioned, Jerry and I were competitors in the discovery of the top quark, and I actually was. There's sort of 2 ways you find the top quark. One of which is a pair of top quarks into an electron and a muon. That was my baby, and we actually knew the answer long before we published, which is the fact that we published simultaneously is a source of frustration for me. But just. Well, it's like the old Tom Lehrer song about, my name in whatever it is cursed when he finds out I published first, if you remember that old song. Yes, okay, there's some name recognition for Tom Lehrer in this audience. But it is an interesting transition when you leave your scientific career and go into politics. And it's become more and more interesting as time goes on. When I first began my first race, my campaign was endorsed by 31 Nobel Prize winners, which I think is a record for a House race. But then it went to 32 after Barack Obama got his Nobel Prize. But, you know, that was a peace prize, so it doesn't really count. You know, we all know about that. But the big change that I've seen in the last, and then the challenge of serving in politics these days, is the way that the truth has become more and more disfigured in our national debate. And this is a fundamental and ongoing problem. It's very different in science. If, as a scientist, you stand up and you say something that you know is not true, it is a career-ending thing. And this is, you know, it used to be that way in politics. If you remember Joe Biden back in the 1980s, you know, I think he lifted one or two applause lines from a British politician, and without attributing them properly. And you then saw that he lost his presidential campaign on that. And if you look at where we are right now in the disregard of the scientific research on climate change, for example, you know, it is sort of breathtaking and a big problem. But the other battle that we cannot lose is supportive research. This is something, you know, I'm on my other committee is the Financial Services Committee. The Federal Reserve made a historic announcement a little more than a month ago, which is that the net worth of Americans went over $100 trillion. $100 trillion. And so that, you know, the argument's made, well, we just can't afford this research. Okay, the scale of that comparison is the net worth of Americans of $100 trillion. And so when you say we can't afford, you know, the sort of fundamental research that Representative Yoder was talking about, you know, you're making a mistake on that. His comment, though, about the return on investment, that's the way to analyze this situation. You know, the return on investment since World War II, that analysis has been done, and more than half of all economic growth is attributable to, you know, federally funded research. And so the idea that we can't afford something with that kind of return on investment is, you know, it's objectively nuts. And so it's one of the reasons I'm proud, you know, to fight for that with you know, a bipartisan set of collaborators on that. And so it's one of the great things that this group does is to make sure that people that take those tough votes in support of the budgets are, you know, get recognized from time to time, and that you get one or two things different than a plaque to put on your office wall. So, thank you all.
Join me, if you would, one final time, thanking all of our speakers this evening. And a hearty congratulations again to our new champions, Senator Gary Peters, Representatives Kevin Yoder and Bill Foster as well. Thank you so much. This is the most powerful city in the world, and within a couple blocks of where we are, there's so much going on. And I'd be confident in saying that this is probably the most important gathering that's taking place, because without what you guys are fighting for in this room and what our champions are fighting for, we'd be in a little bit of trouble. So thank you guys so much for coming out. Look forward to seeing you guys again very soon. And enjoy the evening. We recommend that you guys hang out, chat, enjoy a couple of drinks, and enjoy the night. Thank you very much.